Hey everyone, you're watching KTAL News Now. Today is Friday, which means it is Fantasy Football Friday. I'm your host, Anthony Mocklin, and today I will be covering my top 10 wide receivers this year for fantasy football as you gear up for drafts. I know a lot of people are having drafts this weekend. I have like 3 this weekend that I'm gearing up for, so I'm studying up, preparing as much as I can. But at the end of the day, fantasy is you can have a nice foundation of knowledge and just know what you're talking about and doing, but at the end of the day, it really is just about luck. I mean, if you are playing in a 12-man league, you realistically only have a little more than like a 8% chance to win, and there's only one winner every year, and I'm here to help you try to bump that percentage up just a little bit just to give you an edge over your fantasy league mates or opponents, just to help you dive in, because wide receiver this year is extremely deep at the position. There's so many great players that are available even in the later rounds, but I'm going to give you the top dogs at the position this year in my rankings. So first up, of course, we have Jamar Chase for the Cincinnati Bengals. He is pretty much the consensus number one overall fantasy player this year. Most people are going to be taking him with the first pick. It's a no-brainer. I mean, last year he was the wide receiver one overall, and he caught 127 catches for over 1,700 yards and 17 touchdowns, which is just ridiculous. And he led all wide receivers in targets, red zone targets, touchdowns, receptions, yards, and yards after the catch, just to give you an idea of just how special his season was last year. He won the NFL's Triple Crown, which means that he led all wide receivers in catches, yards, and touchdowns. So it's just something that has not been done in a very, very long time. Like, we're talking decades since the last time that has happened. And, you know, it's just remarkable just how talented he is. There's only so much you could say about him. They're going to continue to be very, very good on offense next year, as the offense as a whole is expected to take a step forward. The offensive line is still a little pedestrian, so Joe Burrow, the quarterback, is going to have a hard time still, I feel like, but they're not going to stop passing the ball. Joe Burrow led the NFL in passing yards last year, and I do not see that changing. But, I mean, like I said, there's only so much you can say about him. He's a no-brainer pick if you have the first pick. If somehow he gets to the second pick, then that's even better. But this guy is a no-brainer when it comes to just being capable of being the best fantasy player overall. And number 2 on my list is Cowboys wide receiver CeeDee Lamb, and he finished as the wide receiver 8 last year, but don't let that fool you, because he was dealing with a shoulder injury as well as their quarterback, Dak Prescott. Dak only ended up playing 8 games last season, so he didn't have that full potential with the starting quarterback, and he still finished as a top 10 wide receiver despite all of that. He caught over 100 passes for almost 1,200 yards and 6 touchdowns. But like I said, do not let the stats fool you. This guy is absolutely elite. And with the addition of wide receiver George Pickens from the Pittsburgh Steelers, that's only going to help him more, because people might be saying, oh, you know, there's not going to be as many passes that will go to him. But you'd be surprised, because George Pickens is also a very good wide receiver, and that will draw more coverage from the defense to leave CeeDee more open on more plays and just have that not as tight of coverage. So he's a guy that can absolutely get open and take the ball and run with it. And like I said, before this season, he was the number 1 wide receiver in 2023, where he caught 135 passes for 1,750 yards and 12 touchdowns, just to show you what he can do with a healthy offense, a healthy Dak Prescott. And I expect more of the same in terms of that production, if not more, this year. And if you miss out on Jamar or Bijan Robinson, this is definitely a guy that I would take if you are looking to hammer wide receiver early. The only person I would consider taking over him that's not a wide receiver is Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs for the Detroit Lions. If you're looking to hammer running back first, if you have a top 4 pick, I don't blame you there. If either one of those guys fall to you, then like I said, it just depends on how you want to attack the first round because you can't. It's not that you win your league in the first round, but you can lose your league in the first round. So it's very important to know what you want to do first going into it. And if you have a top 4 pick, I mean, you really can't go wrong with any of those guys. So just stick to that and you'll be golden. But our third wide receiver on the list is Justin Jefferson for the Minnesota Vikings, another LSU wide receiver. There's going to be plenty of those in this list. I can't remember the last time that so many receivers from the same school are going in like the first round of drafts. It's just insane just how well wide receivers do in the NFL after LSU. And, that's my alma mater, so I'm always going to rep them and just praise that, their WRU or wide receiver university, it is absolutely a wide receiver factory over there. So, and Justin Jefferson might actually be the best receiver in the NFL, but for fantasy purposes, there's a lot of question marks regarding their offensive situation, especially their quarterback, because they had Sam Darnold last year, but now he went to Seattle, so they're turning to their pseudo-rookie J.J. McCarthy. He missed all of last year with an injury, so this is his first NFL action this year. But, there's a lot of question marks still regarding that and what he can do with Justin Jefferson. But if you know Justin Jefferson, you know that he is essentially quarterback-proof. He's had so many different quarterbacks throughout his career so far, and he's still produced every single year. He has finished as a top 5 wide receiver every year since 2021, just to give you an idea of how consistently elite he's been at the position. Last year, he caught over 100 passes for 1,500 yards and 10 touchdowns. And Minnesota surprised a lot of people last year. They had, like I said, they had Sam Darnold, and he helped lead them to a 14-3 record, which I don't think anybody was expecting. People like me were pretty much expecting it to be pretty average and not do a whole lot. Justin Jefferson was going to get his, and then they weren't going to win a whole lot of games, but their offense was clicking last year, as well as their defense. They did step up a whole lot, and like I said, they led them to 14 wins last season. So, but like I said, the question marks surrounding J.J. McCarthy are very real, but we have yet to see a season from Justin Jefferson where he's averaged less than 87.5 yards per game, and I do not see that changing this year. I think he can get over the 90 mark this year, even with JJ. But like I said, until I see it, and there's no indications that there is going to be, because he's pretty much quarterback proof. It doesn't matter who you throw back there. You can throw me back there. I'm still going to get the ball to JJ every single time and let him do it. As long as you get it to your playmakers like JJ and let him work, because he is so amazing in the open field and after the catch. So if you just get the ball in his hands and just let him do his thing, I promise you it will pay dividends. So you don't have to worry a whole lot about the quarterback. Like I said, there's still a little bit of questions there, but you can bank on him being a top 5 receiver at like the worst case scenario, I think, if he stays healthy. I mean, he is dealing with a mild hamstring strain currently, and those can tend to linger throughout the season. That's my only question aside from the quarterback, is just his health, because like I said, those hamstring injuries can stick around, and they won't go away. So I'm really hoping that he stays 100% throughout the season, because like I said, he has top 5 worst case scenario if he's healthy, and number 1 overall fantasy player if he, like, that's absolutely in his range of outcomes. I would not be surprised if that's the case. So he is a smash pick either way, regardless of where the draft falls. If you're looking, like I said, if you're looking to hammer receiver, there's a lot of great receivers in the first round this year, and one of those is Malik Neighbors for the New York Giants. He is my 4th ranked receiver this year, another LSU guy, the 3rd in the top 4, which is insane. But last year he had an incredible season where he finished as the number 6 overall wide receiver, and he caught 109 catches for 1,200 yards and 7 touchdowns. And he did all this with absolutely terrible quarterback play. I mean, you had guys like Daniel Jones, Drew Lock and Tommy DeVito back there throwing him the ball, and he still finished as a top 6 wide receiver, just to give you an idea of just how talented this guy is. And he led the NFL in target share, which is the percentage of a team's pass attempts that go to a specific player. And he had a 32.2% target share, so roughly 1 out of every 3 of New York's passes were going to Malik Neighbors, which is insane. And with the addition of Russell Wilson at quarterback and Jackson Dart, the rookie out of Ole Miss, who they did use a first-round pick on, mind you, that's a lot of draft capital for the future, so it probably is going to be Russell Wilson at least to start the season, but his last few years he looked a little shaky in Denver. Denver was supposed to be very, very good, and then they ended up disappointing pretty much everybody. But Jackson Dart was a gunslinger at Ole Miss. He can absolutely get the ball down the field to Neighbors, which he is great at in terms of contested catches and deep balls. So he is amazing in that aspect, and I really hope that they turn to Dart at least halfway through the season. I'd like to see him at quarterback just to see what he can do, because, I mean, if you pair those two, who knows what they can do. The upside and ceiling is endless. And in terms of range of outcomes, if he stays healthy, his absolute rock bottom, he would be a top 10 wide receiver still. But he, like I said, like Justin Jefferson, he has number 1 overall wide receiver outcome potential. In my opinion, that is definitely in the realm of possibilities. Like I said, if you turbocharge this offense with Jackson Dart, I think the sky is the limit. But my next wide receiver on the list is Nico Collins for the Houston Texans. And he is a particular favorite of mine. You can ask my buddies in my main fantasy league. I refer to him as Nico, my cousin, which if you played the old Grand Theft Auto games, you'll get the reference. But he's a guy. He's one of my guys for sure in the last few years. I ended up getting him in like the 8th round, I think, last year. And he was an absolute stud, especially when he was healthy, because he was a little bit banged up this year. He missed 5 games due to a hamstring injury, which, like I said, can linger into the season. That's my one worry with Justin Jefferson, because these injuries are a little bit finicky when it comes to that. But he still caught 68 passes and reached 1,000 yards receiving and caught 7 touchdowns. He did have a pretty crowded wide receiver room last year, at least for a decent chunk of the season, where they had wide receivers Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs. But Stephon Diggs is now in New England on the Patriots, so there's less competition for targets now. But even with Tank Dell and Diggs healthy and them all being on the same field, it was the first 3 weeks of the season. He had a 24% target share, and he averaged 113 yards per game with 19.3 fantasy points per game, which would have been good for the wide receiver 3 overall in that stretch. And I know it is a small sample size, but like I said, even with that competition for targets, he was still elite. And then whenever Tank Dell missed week 4, he ended up catching 12 passes for 151 yards and a touchdown, just to show you what he can do if he is the sole alpha on the team. And I think he will be again this year. He will absolutely be the number 1 surefire option in Houston as the offense for them takes another step forward. They added Jaden Higgins, who's a rookie receiver, as well as Christian Kirk, who's been bouncing around for a little bit. But I think even with them to kind of spread the defense out, he has top 3 potential at the position. He is absolutely, I think he would absolutely be top 5 receiver if he stays healthy. But like I said, that top 3 potential is there. The sky's the limit for him. Maybe not wide receiver 1 overall, but I think he's definitely in the conversation for those top 3 guys. But my 6th guy on the list today is Amon-Ra St. Brown for the Detroit Lions. He finished as the number 3 wide receiver overall in each of the last 2 seasons, and the year before that, he was the wide receiver 7. So it just shows you how consistent he's been. He's one of the safer options, especially in PPR, points per reception. Like I said, he's finished as a top 7 wide receiver each of the last 3 seasons. Last year, he caught 115 passes for over 1,263 yards and 12 touchdowns. So he's going to get his, especially in PPR. He has a very strong floor. Like I said, very safe pick. He's going to get over 100, probably around 115 catches again. But the ceiling for him is not the highest in the world. I don't think he has top 3 potential. But he's a surefire, easy bet for him to be at least he probably could be a top 5 receiver again this year, because he was carried the past 2 years by his touchdown equity, where he had double-digit touchdowns in each of the last 2 seasons. While that might not be sustainable, especially being that high of a number, I think if he gets maybe like 8 to 10 this year, I think he can definitely finish in the top 5 again. But like I said, he is kind of buoyed by those touchdowns, so be a little careful with that. But in terms of PPR, he is going to get triple-digit catches. There's nothing to worry about if he stays healthy. The Detroit Lions offense is going to be better than ever this year, I think, especially with the rise of Jamison Williams as he takes another step forward as a receiver. But yeah, like I said, he's a very safe option. Not really the highest upside in the world, but he's a surefire bet to be at least top 10 at the very worst. But my next pick on the list has a lot of other question marks, not surrounding him, but around his quarterback, and that's Puka Nacua for the Los Angeles Rams. And he finished as the wide receiver 4 in 2023, but he ended up missing a lot of last season. He only played 9 games last year. He got hurt in week 1 to start the season, so that was very detrimental to the Rams offense because he was their guy. Even when healthy, like he played 9 games last year, and those 9 games where he played over 50% of the snaps, it was usually around like the second half of the season. It typically took place from weeks 8 through 17. But in those games, he had a 35% target share, so he was getting everything thrown at him, and he averaged 105 yards per game and 22 fantasy points per game. That in that time frame, that would have only been second to Jamar Chase, who was number 1 on this list, just to give you an idea of just how insanely good he can be when everything is going right. Because if the Rams offense is 100%, he is absolutely in the conversation for the number 1 overall wide receiver. But that's what kind of gives me pause on this, because their quarterback Matthew Stafford is dealing with a disc injury in his back, and that's not really something that to take lightly, because he's saying that he's experiencing soreness every single day and he's going to try to manage it throughout the season. So this is not something that's going to go away. I mean, he's getting up there in age. He's 37 now. He's had 3 pretty significant back injuries in the last 6 years of his career. So that, if he ends up getting hurt, I mean, Puka's stock is going to go pretty downhill pretty fast, because Stafford and Puka, they are one and the same. They are absolutely in sync on every single play. And like I said, whenever both of them are on the field, he is looking Puka's way. Like, he is going to get him the ball almost half of the time, pretty much. So, like I said, if both of them are healthy, then yeah, it's fine and dandy. He's going to be a top 3 receiver, I think. But, that does concern me a little bit, especially with the addition of Devontae Adams from the Raiders, that's another formerly elite wide receiver. If he can be at least half as decent as he has been in his career, that's another competition. That's another person to take targets away from Puka, but I don't see that happening a whole lot. I mean, Devontae is still really good, but he's not at his peak anymore. So I think, like I said, you just got to be careful with that Stafford injury, because that is something that, like I said, is not going away. And it's interesting to see, because, I mean, Matthew Stafford, he's a warrior. He's fought through everything. He's super tough. He's had so many injuries throughout his career, especially in Detroit. But, this is something that is very serious and can derail their whole season if he ends up missing time, especially with Puka's output and production in fantasy. So just another thing to keep an eye on. But my number 8 receiver this year is Drake London for the Atlanta Falcons, and he is also another one of my guys. I've been on the Drake London train for a while now. You can ask all my friends. Whenever he got drafted, we were comparing him to Treylon Burks, who got drafted by the Tennessee Titans, who I'm pretty sure isn't even in the NFL anymore. So I ended up winning that battle. Just no big deal or anything. But I've been a truther of his for a very long time, and he finally had that breakout season last year because he finished outside the top 30 in each of his first 2 seasons at wide receiver. But last year he finally had that breakout. Like I said, he finished as the number 5 overall wide receiver last year, where he caught 100 passes for almost 1,300 yards and 9 touchdowns. And he did so on pretty shaky quarterback play. Kirk Cousins was supposed to be very good, but I mean he was pretty much average last year. I mean he was showing his age and he was just coming off of an Achilles injury, so that's pretty hard to recover from. But with Cousins throughout the season, he had almost a 25% target share and was averaging just 65 yards per game at receiving yards per game. But with Michael Penix Jr., who was their rookie quarterback last year, who was expected to be the full-time starter this year, I know it was a small sample size. It was only 3 games. But my goodness, in those 3 games, Drake London had a 39% target share with Michael Penix and 117 yards per game. So if that gives you any indication at all, like I said, I know it's only 3 games that we're going off of. It's very hard to judge over the course of a whole season and the production that he can do with him. But if they're even half as good as that, I think, Drake London could be a top 5 receiver again. And he could very well lead all receivers in targets. I mean, he was pretty dang close last year. He finished 3rd among wide receivers in targets with 157 targets, and I think they're absolutely going to pepper him every single game with targets. Like, I think it's not outside the range of outcomes for him to be top 5, maybe even creep up to top 3 if we're going to get really bold and everything breaks their way if Penix is the real deal and he just finds him every play. I mean, he's another guy like Nico Collins where there's no competition for targets. He is absolutely going to be the alpha in that offense. And I'm super excited to see him because, like I said, I've been on the Drake London train for such a long time, and I'm so happy to see him having this breakout and being a first-round fantasy pick, arguably, or maybe late first, early second. But I'm hoping that next year he will be a no-doubter first-round pick next year for fantasy purposes. But my number 9 wide receiver on this list is Brian Thomas Jr. for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And that is the 4th LSU guy in the top 10. Just to hammer home wide receiver university again. He finished as the number 4 overall wide receiver last year on his way to 87 catches for almost 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns. If you look at just the general numbers, it doesn't tell the whole story because in the first half of the season, he was somewhat inconsistent to start because in his first 11 games, he only had 4 games with over 15 fantasy points. But after their bye week in Week 12, he just hit the ground running and never looked back because he finished in that time period from weeks 13 to 17. He was the number 2 overall wide receiver during that stretch. And he was averaging 23 fantasy points per game on 11 targets per game and 100 yards per game, and he added 5 touchdowns in that 6-game stretch. So just to give you an insane idea of how great he was during that stretch at the end of the season, and I think if he takes another step forward, I don't know, there's no limit to what he can do. He's another guy that could finish as a top 5 receiver. I don't think that's too crazy to say, but I would not be surprised if he finishes as a top 3 receiver because, like I said, he started somewhat slow last year to start the season, and he still ended up as the 4th overall wide receiver at season-long ranking. And he did so while having Mac Jones as his quarterback for a good bit of the season because Trevor Lawrence was hurt. He only played 10 games. So if you have Trevor Lawrence for the whole season, like I said, who knows what he can do? The sky is the limit for him. But my final receiver on this list is A.J. Brown for the Philadelphia Eagles. And the only reason I have him this low is because the Eagles did not pass the ball pretty much at all last season. They finished dead last in terms of passing attempts in the entire NFL. And like I said, it's not a a dig at A.J. Brown or anything or his talent. He's a very elite talent, but it just depends on how much the Eagles pass the ball this year because they ran Saquon Barkley into the ground last year. I mean, I don't blame them. They were the best rushing team in the NFL last year. Their offensive line is top-notch, probably among the best, if not the best. And A.J. Brown ended up missing 4 games last year, but in the previous 2 years, he was a top 6 receiver in both of those years. But like I said, his ceiling has a cap on it because of the lack of passing volume in this offense. And even though he finished among all wide receivers, he was 25th in targets per game, but he was still 5th in receiving yards per game and 2nd in target share among all wide receivers in the entire NFL. So just to give you an idea of how efficient he was with his limited targets. But I don't think that Philly is going to pass the ball nearly like as little as they did last year. So there is some room for regression there. But the question is just how much more are they going to pass the ball? Are they still going to lean on that run to the Super Bowl again? Who knows? I think they can get back there, but we'll see. But that's all my top 10 receivers today. I wish all of you the best of luck in your drafts. If you still haven't drafted yet, if you're waiting for next weekend, I'll have a top 10 tight ends segment of Fantasy Football Friday next week. So be sure to stick around for that. But you can tune in to KTAL News Now every day, Monday through Friday. Next week, we'll kick things off with a weekend recap. I'll tell you how my drafts went and just other events that happened around the area. And then Tech Tuesday is always on Tuesday. Always really, really awesome, very exciting content there regarding technology news, space, anything regarding technology that we are advancing in this ever-growing digital world. And then, Wednesdays are your Wellness Wednesdays. And then Thursday, we usually look ahead to the weekend. And then Friday, of course, is usually Feel Good Friday. But since fantasy football fever has hit all of us, it's kind of taken over that for the moment. But don't worry, during the season, we'll have more sports-related things looking ahead to games in college, high school, NFL. We'll have everything covered football-wise. So be sure to stick with us throughout this season on KTAL News Now, which, like I said, streams every Monday through Friday at 1 p.m. on our website at ktalnews.com. You can find all of our older episodes on our YouTube at KTAL News. But for now, I'm Anthony Mocklin. Have a great rest of your day. Good luck in all of your drafts, and thank you for joining us.